as life in the UK and in many parts of the world just came to a halt. Now, it's 5 years. praying for the Pope, but of course, perhaps thinking about the future as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's been no question there's been a time of enormous uncertainty in the church. And in Rome, I'm not in Rome now, but I was until recently. And there's no question that people were thinking about a papal transition because that possibility seemed real. I think now what we're looking at is a very interesting new time in the church and in the papacy. Nobody doubts that we will have a frail pope. We've already had a reasonably frail pope the last few years. He's been in a wheelchair and so on. But his mind, of course, is absolutely clear. I've sat down with him many times over the last 2 or 3 years. His humor never leaves him. His will is there. The mind is there. But obviously, an 88-year-old suffers from various physical restrictions. And now I think what we're going to see is a much, as it were, quieter papacy. But I think it could be still a very rich time. And I think this will be a very interesting and important time for the church and in his papacy. It's almost like a chapter we did not expect to be written, but we will now see in action. He himself has been saying from the hospital, he's been saying some very interesting and important things. And of course, he has a message that's released to us today, which I can't talk about yet because it's embargoed for a few minutes. But he's been talking about the frailty, how frailty and fragility allows us to see what's really, really important in the world and in life. He looks out from his hospital bed, he said the other day, and just realizes even more how absurd war is. And I think we'll hear about that today in his message.
Interesting. Austin, can you talk about the last meeting you had with him? And can you describe, knowing Pope Francis as you do, what it will be like for him if he has to have, how did you describe it, a slightly less sort of outward-going papacy from here on in?
Yeah, I mean, we've come to expect, because of Francis's, whirlwind energy, his extraordinary charisma, we've come to expect, as it were, him to be that way. But of course, the last few years, he has had to cut back a lot with his mobility. And what I say as his biographer, somebody who's studied his life, is I think actually the times in his life where he's faced severe restrictions and suffered from them have also been actually very rich time. You just had a piece about remembering coronavirus 5 years ago. That was a very, very difficult time for the Pope, where he was essentially trapped in the Vatican, couldn't meet people, and yet it turned out to be a very rich time.
Austin, I'm sorry, we've run out of time. Austin Overy, biographer for the Pope. We'll have more in the next hour of the show.
Ragazzi, non c'è del temporino, non c'è del temporino perché
He's being treated for double pneumonia. He is due to be discharged later on today. We are watching this window because we are expecting Pope Francis to appear at that window and give a blessing. People have gathered outside the hospital to greet the Pope and see him for the first time since he was admitted to hospital on the 14th of February. Our correspondent Lisa Holland is here with me now. And Lisa, you've just returned from Rome, covering Pope Francis, his time in hospital, and this is going to be another huge moment for him.
Honestly, it's really quite a remarkable sight looking at that window, because if you put it into the context of just how gravely ill Pope Francis has been, I think that even his inner circle, certainly the Vatican spokespeople that we've been talking to, really feared that he was not going to make it through this health crisis. And even in the words of the doctors at the news conference yesterday, admitting that his life had been in serious danger. And throughout the course of the last month or so, standing outside the hospital there and also at the Vatican, you know, on 3 particular occasions I can think of where a newsline came out from the Vatican of just how seriously ill, how critically ill the Pope was. It really is an incredible moment to be looking at that window, which incidentally is on the 5th floor of the Gemelli Hospital. The Pope has been staying at the papal suites, which are on the 10th floor. So I'm told that the reason that window is being used is because it is more suitable for somebody in a wheelchair. We certainly don't expect to see the Pope to be walking in any sense. He will be in a wheelchair. In fact, it's true to say that the Pope was in a wheelchair even before this health crisis. He wasn't already, and there he is, Pope Francis at 88 years of age, and you can obviously hear the response from the crowd. I mean, it's difficult to see on his face, but it is something that he wanted. He looks fragile, but he looks weak, certainly, it has to be said. He looks very weak, very tired around the eyes.
Okay, Lisa, we've been listening. He is speaking.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I see this lady with yellow flowers, holding yellow flowers. Very good. Thank you. That was the moment, Lisa. Fair to say he looks unwell.
He looks frail, and I'm not sure just at the end there whether he was struggling to breathe
At
a
least
little.
coughing, maybe, yeah.
Yes. However, notable to say that the Pope was there without any kind of oxygen support, even if just for a few minutes. We know that he has been having quite intense oxygen support over the course of the past 5 weeks since he went into the Gemelli Hospital. But just to sort of reflect on the enormity of the moment a second, I'm told that there are about 1,000 people who had gathered there of all sorts of nationalities. People come and go to the Vatican all the time, pilgrims making pilgrimages, and once word spread, no doubt they will have gone to the Gemelli to just catch this glimpse of Pope Francis. There are a lot of police there, people from all over the world. I spotted some flags there from Israel, Ukraine. There are priests, cardinals, tourists, Catholics who are visiting Rome. But what we're seeing there is a really determined man. When you talk to people who follow Pope Francis, who've interviewed Pope Francis, spent time with Pope Francis, they all talk first of all, about the modesty of his papacy, his determination to be amongst the people, but also his own strength of character. Vatican sources have been telling us that, in fact, doctors wanted him to stay in hospital for a few more days. There was talk of a discharge from hospital on Tuesday, but he clearly wanted to hasten that. I was at the Gemelli last Sunday when there was a rumour that he would appear at the balcony, and in the event he didn't, which was a disappointment to many people who'd also gathered, not as many people as I can see there now, but still a rumour that he would appear at the window. There were a lot of children from various Vatican charities who'd gathered last weekend who were clearly a little disappointed. And that's not something that Pope Francis would want. If there was a rumour that he would appear at the window, I think he would have been absolutely doggedly determined to try to appear at that window again today. But from here, the geography, the choreography is that he is now expected on discharge to go back to the Vatican. Currently, the Vatican is not saying exactly how that mode of transport will be. We don't expect it to be any kind of medevac by air because that could be quite a traumatic experience being helicoptered. By road, ordinarily, it would take you from the Vatican to the Gemelli Hospital with traffic, maybe 20, 25 minutes. But clearly, if he goes by road, the roads will be cleared. He won't be stopping at any traffic lights. You could do it in about 10-ish minutes. So probably by road. What remains to be seen is whether he goes by car or ambulance. We know that for Pope Francis, with regard to this health crisis, of course, he's had pneumonia. It's not entirely clear if the doctors are saying he's completely cleared that pneumonia. But clearly he's stable, he's hugely better. But what we are also seeing is not just the journey of the Pope back to the Vatican, but a journey within his papacy. The words that were used to me by somebody that we were interviewing quite recently about it is that we are now entering a papacy which will be more prophetic, less dynamic. Yes. By that, he can't be travelling. He won't be travelling. He's got this 2-month period of recovery at the Vatican. His lungs have been damaged. He's been very, very ill. Question marks, of course, over potential trips which he should be making, which seem exceptionally unlikely. Turkey's one destination. We know that King Charles is due to go there in April. That feels extremely unlikely to me, although there's been no official word. But looking at that picture, you can see with Pope Francis's picture of his finger, he's just determined to connect with people.
Fist. Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's picked someone out, the lady in the yellow.
What his papacy is about. It's about with connecting with people. If it's children, he goes on to the level of a child's mind. If it's with adults, he just tries to connect with whoever's there. And it will be a great disappointment to him that he won't physically be able to be out and about. We know that the day he went into hospital, for example, on February the 14th, there's a photograph actually of him with the Slovak Prime Minister who'd gone to the Vatican on that day. And he told the doctors, I'm not ready to go to hospital until I've finished this meeting. And it was only after that he then went. But yes, he does look incredibly frail, but still remarkable that he is able to leave hospital.
Yeah, he'll have to have had the full clearance, of course, of his doctors to go home, and that 2-month convalescence at the Vatican will be hugely important. This is the St. Peter's Square, the Vatican Square. You can see a large screen has been erected there for people who have travelled, who will then be hoping very soon, as Lisa said, that Pope Francis is going to make his way back to Vatican City. Lisa, I'll bring you back in a moment, because it's a hugely important year, isn't it, for Catholics as well. It's the Jubilee year as well, so we will want to be back among the faithful, if he can be. Let's bring in Austin Ivory, who's the biographer of the Pope. And Austin, thank you very much for staying with us. First of all, I'd just like to get your reaction and feeling, having seen those pictures of the Pope.
Well, I think mixed feelings. I mean, obviously relief to see him smiling and being himself. But yes, struck, as Lisa was, by his fragility, by his... he does look like he's had a month in hospital battling pneumonia. And I don't think anybody expected him to look amazing. But yeah, he definitely has been weakened by this. And of course, he did say a few words in the end, spontaneous words in response to somebody in the crowd with flowers. And that's very typical of him, to appreciate what the people, as it were, are are doing for him and bringing to him. So I very much sense that this was Pope Francis, fine inside himself, but yes, physically frail, and will need definitely a long period of pretty strict convalescence to have a full recovery.
And Austin, you mentioned when we spoke last hour that we may well get some words from the Pope, at least released from the Vatican today. Can you talk to us a little bit about the sort of the choreography of what may well come next on this Sunday?
So what we've actually already had is the text of what's called the Angelus, which is the blessing that he gives every Sunday, normally in the Vatican from the balcony of the Apostolic Palace. And this is where he usually gives a reflection on the Gospel of the day. And today I just pick out something he said, because he's referred to his own hospitalization. He said, "In this long time of being in hospital, I have experienced the Lord's patience, which I see also reflected in the tireless care of the doctors and health workers, as well as in the attention and the hope of the relatives of the sick. This trusting patience, anchored in God's unfailing love, is so necessary in our lives, especially facing the most difficult and painful situations." So, he's teaching, as it were, off his experience there in the hospital, talking about God's patience, the importance of believing in God's unfailing love, that we will come through in the end. I think it's been a huge lesson for him in hospital, because he is, I think, naturally, one might say, an impetuous and impatient man. His instincts, if you like, are visceral. He's a man of action. But he has learnt during these periods of his life that where he has been confined and restricted, he's often, I think, uncovered a spiritual depth which he perhaps hasn't had in other times of his life. I think back in the early 90s, for example, he had 2 years of what's sometimes known as his exile within Argentina. It's a complicated story, but basically he couldn't be a leader at that time. And again, we were talking just earlier about the COVID crisis of 5 years ago. Remember, it was 5 years ago this week that he went up the steps in St. Peter's Square to proclaim that extraordinary meditation from an abandoned, wet, dark St. Peter's Square, acting as a kind of Moses. And, that time was a time of enormous restriction for him. He couldn't meet people. He had to basically stay inside. But it turned out to be a very rich and creative and fruitful time. And that's why I agree with what Lisa's guest, she was quoting somebody who was saying that this papacy now may be less dynamic, but in many ways will be more prophetic. I agree with that. I think this could be an extremely rich time where we're going to get a kind of a contrast between a frail Pope who's unable to be dynamic and charismatic in the way that we've known, and yet who utters extremely important words to us at this time of crisis that we're facing in the world. So we begin today this new phase, this new chapter in the pontificate, which will be, I think, a time of surprises, but also a time of great fruitfulness. But yeah, he will not be the Pope that we've known so much for these last 10 years.
Okay, Austin Ivory, the blog for the Pope, thank you very much for that. And we did just see a moment there, didn't we, Lisa, of the Pope in a white Fiat making his way, we presume, from the hospital to Vatican City, sitting in the front seat.
I have to say that.
Because I was looking in the back seat to see where he was going to be, and then he was there in the passenger.
In the days and days of kind of mulling over if and when the Pope would leave hospital, how would it be? I didn't think he would be in the front seat of a Fiat car. We'd sort of mulled over, would he be medevaced? One time we were standing at our live position right by the Vatican, and a medevac helicopter landed, which was a very unusual sight, and we were thinking, has the Pope been moved back to the Vatican? This was about a week or so ago. And then, of course, given that he's had these respiratory crises, you thinking, well, would he go by road in an ambulance? I wasn't expecting he'd be in the front seat of the car in the white Pope-mobile.
I'm not sure even the camera operator expected him to be there. Otherwise, they would have zoomed in earlier to try and capture it. I think that was very unexpected that he'd be sitting there in the front seat.
Vehicle. But yeah, that's very Pope Francis, though, to be honest, very down to earth. Probably just the way he would have liked it. And as I say, he won't be stopping at any traffic lights, so he should be back at Santa Marta at the Vatican, just up there on the right-hand side, within potentially about sort of 10 to 15 minutes. What we're seeing here, of course, is the Vatican buildings to the right of St. Peter's Basilica, and it's at those very windows, top floor, right-hand building, that people would be gathered outside the Vatican at this very time to be listening to the Angelus, which we've been talking about. And he's obviously missed that for weeks and weeks now. I think it's about the sixth Sunday. And that's where he wants to be, back at the Vatican. He doesn't like being in hospital. He would have wanted to have left sooner if he could. And I think that there has been this battle of wills between the doctors and the Pope himself in terms of when can he leave, when do the doctors want him to go? And as I was saying before, the sense that the doctors wanted him to stay until Tuesday of next week, and he was just determined to leave today. But yeah, waving at people. They will be absolutely thrilled, overjoyed. Remember, of course, this is the first time that we've seen him. We've had an audio message. We've had a photograph a week ago again, which was a little bit out of the blue, but I think there was this building momentum that Pope Francis hadn't been seen in person for so long. There was this clamour that the Vatican was asked to share a photograph. So there was the photograph a week ago when he was seen at prayer on the Sunday. It was a photograph from the back of his head, which of course many people speculated. Why was that a photograph of the back of his head, that we couldn't quite fully see him? But there's also a question of dignity, that people are going to pore over these images and look and see how does he look. It's not a surprise, as we're saying, to see him in a wheelchair. It's a positive that he's there without any kind of oxygen support. And also, of course, you can get mobile oxygen, but we're assuming that in the front seat of the Fiat there isn't any kind of oxygen supply. And clearly this abject determination to say something as well. We know that his voice has been weakened from this pneumonia in both lungs. It's taken a heavy toll. But they're just remarking, is that the lady with the yellow flowers that he was referring to, that he can see, that he's spotted? But yes,
it's that connection, isn't it?
Very determined figure, yeah.
Now, as you say, he would normally be at the Vatican in better health and would be providing the Angelus for today. It has now been published. And I want to read a bit of it. Austin Ivory mentioned some of this in our conversation in the chat that we just had a minute ago, but I want to bring you a little bit more of what the Pope's Angelus says this Sunday. Of course, he begins it by saying, "Dear brothers and sisters, happy Sunday." He then goes on to say, "In this long period of my hospitalisation, I've had the opportunity to experience the Lord's patience, which I also see reflected in the tireless care of the doctors and healthcare workers, as well as in the care and hopes of the relatives of the sick. This trusting patience, anchored in God's unfailing love, is indeed necessary in our lives, especially when facing the most difficult and painful situations." He then goes on to talk about world defence. "I am saddened by the resumption of heavy Israeli bombing on the Gaza Strip, causing many deaths and injuries. I call for an immediate halt to the weapons and for the courage to resume dialogue so that all hostages may be released and a final ceasefire reached. In the Strip, the humanitarian situation is again very serious and requires urgent commitment from the conflicting parties and the international community." He then says, "On the other hand, I am pleased that Armenia and Azerbaijan have reached on the final text of their peace agreement. I hope that is signed as soon as possible to bring lasting peace to the Caucasus." He also prays for an end to the wars in Ukraine, Lebanon, Myanmar, Sudan, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. He finishes his Angelus with, "May the Virgin Mary keep you and continue to accompany us on our journey towards Easter." And Easter, of course, is going to be a huge moment. Perhaps that's part of the sequencing of this, as to the doctors saying, OK, you can go home, you must recover for 2 months and you will be at Vatican in time for Easter.
Yes, and I mean, obviously it raises questions about the level of activity that he can participate in, which is seemingly kind of next to nothing physically at the moment, because even being outdoors by a window, if it were to be a cold day, would be a worry for doctors. In fact, the day that he was unable to finish his Sunday homily, which I think from memory now is 6 weeks ago, which triggered this latest illness, and he was seen handing over his text to an aide to finish, we're told that on that day, he was insistent that he would go outdoors, and people who were watching the Pope 6 weeks ago were thinking, this is crazy. It was so cold, it was so wet, it was a February day going back in time, and people think that decision to be outdoors exacerbated his health crisis, and then the bronchitis, of course, turned into pneumonia. So the question now is to what extent will he be controlled by the doctors who will say you must have a quiet 2 months of recuperating inside of the Vatican. I think from the Angelus that you just read out, I mean, things that stand out to me, of course, is the humility of him saying during his hospitalisation he's experienced the Lord's patience, but also just how on it that he is in terms of referencing what's been going on in Gaza this week. And even in the Angelus last week, that was followed up by another message from the Pope referring to events in Macedonia where there'd been a large loss of life. And during one of the briefings, one of the doctors said, this is an 88-year-old man who we know is frail, but he has the mind of a 50-year-old. Right. And so that will be his battle, his internal battle, him wanting to connect, him wanting to be relevant. He has plenty to say, but clearly his body needs to recover.
Certainly does. Lisa, you're going to stay with us. I want to bring Austin Ivory back in, the Pope's biographer. And Austin, we were speaking when we first saw those pictures of the Pope in the front seat of that Fiat. I'll get you to respond to that, first of all, if you can, and where he's on his way to now. We're seeing on the wires, on the news agency wires, pictures of live shots of the streets of Rome. So I guess there is a motorcade, a procession carrying him from the Gemelli Hospital to the Vatican.
Yeah, I'm not sure if procession's the word. I think simply they would have cleared the streets for his speedy return, and people, of course, are coming out onto the streets spontaneously to welcome him back. I mean, that's what so often happens when he moves around Rome on those occasions that he does. Look, the fact that he's gone in his little white Fiat is, I mean, it made me smile. I think it's made us all smile. Yesterday, his communications people were not going to be drawn on how he was going to go back to the Santa Marta. And I'm sure I saw a flicker of a smile on their faces. I think they knew that he was going to be in the Fiat and that was going to take us all by surprise. It's a classic Francis gesture, as Lisa was saying, of humility. And that's very much him. He's going back now to the Santa Marta guest house within the Vatican, which is where he has room 201. He has a very small, very basic suite of rooms, a bedroom and a sitting room and a bathroom and a study. And I understand that has been now equipped with oxygen, so he can continue to have oxygen therapy, which is not very complicated technologically. I think at night he'll continue to use a mask to assist with his breathing, and he will embark then on his convalescence. And the one thing that will take time to come back, we've been told, is his voice, because you cannot have had oxygen therapy for a month and not, in a sense, lose your voice. And that's essentially what has happened. He has lost his voice, and he needs to bring it back, and that'll take time.
And Austin, you talk about the apartments. I was going to ask whether or not they had been converted to make sure he received the appropriate amount of care. And I can't imagine that the doctors at Gemelli will have let him go home, back to the Vatican, if they weren't absolutely confident that there would be all the equipment there needed for the Pope to make sure that his recovery is a safe one.
Absolutely right. Well, the Pope has a full-time doctor, Luigi Carbone. He also has a nurse, a male nurse, to attend to him. And I don't think, I'm no expert on this, but I understand that whatever re-equipping they've had to do of his room won't have involved very much, because basically he's going to continue the therapy that he's been having in the Gemelli recently, which is to say oxygen therapy, particularly at night, and antibiotic therapy, because the infection hasn't yet completely gone, although he's overcome his pneumonia, but there are still some infections. And obviously antibiotics and oxygen therapy don't require a lot of equipment. But yeah, he will definitely have a lot of medical attention and care over these next 2 months. And I think he will be, everybody knows that he will be impatient to get back at the wheel. But on the other hand, the doctors have told us yesterday, the doctors who've been treating him at the hospital that he has been exemplary. He's been remarkably, obedient and patient because he knows that this is serious. And prolonging his life is not his priority. Service is his priority. But obviously, in order to be able to serve, he needs to not be constantly be going back to hospital. So I think he'll be taking pretty good care of himself, certainly by his standards, to a remarkable extent.
Austin, talk to us about the final line that we've got here in the Angelus, where he talks about the journey towards Easter, and perhaps if you can answer some of the question that Lisa and I had about what his role may well be over Easter. I mean, talk to us about what his role was before this illness and what it could be in the next few weeks.
Well, obviously, Easter's an extremely important time, the most important time for the Church, and the Holy Week liturgies and services in Rome are extremely important. However, it's not unprecedented for a pope not to be at them, and it's happened in his own papacy. He's had to miss occasional Easter services. That's okay, and in which case what happens is anyway he officially presides at those services. He doesn't in recent years actually stand at the altar. So obviously he will appear if he can in some way at those Easter liturgies, but if he can't, then I think everybody will understand and life will go on. And I think we're going to look now at some of the things in the diary. For example, the meeting with King Charles on April the 8th. And I think the hope will be that the Pope will be able to greet King Charles, again, in some way that we're not yet clear about. But if on the day he can't, then Cardinal Parolin, his Secretary of State, will do so on his behalf. And King Charles's visit to the Vatican, anyway, isn't just about meeting the Pope. He's taking part in an important event in the Sistine Chapel, ecumenical event for creation. But obviously, it will be great if the Pope is able to greet him and we're able to get those pictures. But again, if he can't, that's okay. What must come first at the moment is his recovery. And the important thing in all of this, and all the time he's been in hospital, he's never lost consciousness. He's always been alert. He's been signing papers. He's been working. He has been governing the Church, and he will continue to govern the Church, from his room. He will be able to, to have private meetings, not big meetings, but private meetings. He'll be able to sign papers. The work of the Church, in other words, goes on. And one might say the most important work that he does as Pope, which is the spiritual one, praying for us, with us, he will absolutely be able to continue.
And Austin, just to press you on this a little bit, because there seems to be a bit of a tension in that, of course, the Pope will want to continue providing the service that the head of the Catholic Church provides, but a lot of that is that connection with people. If he's unable to connect with people, he's going to find that quite difficult. Bearing in mind what you've told us about and what we all know about Pope Francis as a man who is very determined, can be quite stubborn, and wants to be able to be as active as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I think tension is a good way of describing it. And I mean, clearly we learnt yesterday from his doctors that, he's been gagging to go back for the last few days, asking insistently, when can I go back, when can I go back? And that's him, he will want to be back in action. I think the doctors will sometimes have to say to him, look, Holy Father, you really shouldn't be doing this. You do need to rest. And I think there'll be difficult conversations sometimes ahead, of course. But I think basically he will respect his doctor's advice. And look, long term, and I've always thought that the real issue here is the long term papacy. Obviously, if we're looking at a future where he won't be able to meet people and he won't be able to carry out those very, very important pastoral functions of the papacy, then I think he could consider, he's always said he would consider resignation in those circumstances. But the distinction that I've always made is that, one thing is being ill for a time, being frail. That's okay. We can have popes who are ill for a time. We can have frail popes, popes in a wheelchair, popes who can't get out much. As long as they can continue to carry out the basic functions of the papacy, he will carry on. This is not a job, it's a mission, it's a vocation that God has given him for as long as he's able to do it. And I think as long as he's able to do it, he will want to.
OK, Austin, you're going to stick around for now. So watching these live pictures from Vatican City, you would have just seen that white Fiat pass through shot there, and people have gathered on the streets, Lisa, haven't they? I mean, I guess this is spontaneous gathering, knowing that he's been released from hospital and then knowing the route that he might be travelling along. But it just shows that people are desperate to want to try and catch a glimpse of the Pope on his way back.
Yes, and just to remind ourselves, because there hasn't been this sight of the Pope until this photograph was released last Sunday, and then again it was just a still photograph. It was the back of the Pope's head as he was praying. So 5 weeks in hospital, nearly 6 weeks really since he was seen out in public, which was at the Vatican. So an enormous amount of goodwill, of course, from just passers-by on the street. But as we touched on earlier, it's this Jubilee year, which is incredibly important. It's sort of once every 25 years. And essentially Catholics will go to the Vatican, they'll walk over the threshold of the front door seeking atonement. There are a staggering number of pilgrims who will be in Rome visiting the Vatican for this year, I think something like 30 million.
Wow.
And there are lots and lots of events which have gone on or been modified without the Pope. I'm thinking, for example, a couple of Sundays ago, a couple of weekends ago, there was an event with deacons, Catholic deacons who'd come from all over the world. And we actually met two lovely deacons from the Midlands, from the Birmingham diocese. And I talked to them about what it felt like coming to this special Jubilee event, which they'll of course looked forward to for a long time, and then actually visiting the Vatican without a Pope who would have been, 20 minutes away at the Gemelli Hospital. And people I found were very calm about that. They were quite prophetic, and they also say that the Pope is very much with them in spirit. And so he will have attempted, even in this state of fragility and even at the times when his health was in a critical condition, to offer that spiritual guidance, that spiritual leadership, which people say they felt very strongly via, for example, the Angelus messages, which have been coming out, via other kind of messages, and via the messages from, for example, the Vatican spokespeople who will have been saying, the Pope has been able to read, he knows that people around the world are praying for him. He specifically asked people again and again to keep praying for him. So they still feel connected to him, even if he's physically not been at the Vatican for so long.
Okay, Lisa, thank you very much for that. Lisa Holden there, who was in Rome recently as the Pope was in hospital. We are now told he has now arrived back at his apartment at the Vatican, discharged from hospital after being there for 38 days. He was admitted on the 14th of February with double pneumonia. Pope Francis, the 88-year-old pontiff, is back now at the Vatican. Thank you to Lisa, and also to the Pope's biographer, Austin Ivory, for being with us. And of course, we'll keep an eye on the situation in the Vatican throughout the day here on Sky News Today. Welcome back to Sky News Today and our continuing coverage of the Pope as he is discharged from hospital. I had mentioned that we thought he had arrived at the Vatican. We are now being told, Lisa is still here with us, by our producer in Rome, that he may actually still be on his way back.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that we would have expected that he would have been there by now, but we're told that he's had to divert his planned route, presumably because there's so many people who are wanting to catch a glimpse of that little white Fiat in some way. So we're now told that he's in the city centre of Rome, but he's still not actually reached the Vatican. He's had to divert via the Basilica Santa Maria Maggiore, which ironically is actually where he had always said that he would have wanted to have been buried. So he is, now that shot there is very, obviously as you can see, is very close. Those walls very close now to the back of the Vatican. So it may well be that we do get a shot of that white Fiat, which in the top right-hand corner, I think we saw leave at about 10 past the hour. So, yeah, clearly we were talking about the geography of getting from the Gemelli Hospital to the Vatican. And for you or I, if we were jumping in a taxi, it would be about 20 minutes, maybe 25, depending on the traffic. And ahead of this, they were saying because of road closures and him, of course, not stopping for traffic lights and being escorted, etc., he should have been able to have done it in about 10. So it is fair to say that we probably would have expected him to be there by now. But it looks like from that shot, which is to the back of the Vatican, that potentially, obviously, are expecting him on that route. It was, of course, only announced yesterday afternoon, which is plenty of time for people to have got to Rome if they wanted to try to catch a glimpse. Here it comes. No, it's not, is it? That's another white car, in fact. Another white car.
Very close eye on white Fiats passing through the streets of Rome today.
I'm not sure that was a Fiat, but yes. And as we've discussed, yesterday, the Vatican would not be drawn on the mode of transport, even, just talking to our own producer just before I came to the studio at the top of the hour, is it any clearer yet whether it will be by ambulance or by car? I think by the stage of 11 o'clock UK time, 12 o'clock Rome, we'd sort of ruled out the Medivac. But yes.
Lisa, just situate us here if you can. Are we actually inside Vatican City looking out now, or are we in Rome? I mean, there was a large wall there to the left of...
Yes, I think that is just the streets of Rome.
Right.
When you go into Vatican City, certainly by St Peter's Basilica, there are sort of quite clear markings of what is the Vatican. So you wouldn't probably be able to film and put this live shot up. This would be in Rome, but just very close to the back of the Vatican.
Now, Lisa, we were talking a short while ago about your conversation with two deacons, you say, who travelled to the Vatican while the Pope was in hospital, and talking about their sort of feelings about going to Rome for a very important event and not having the Pope being there. In your time in the city, in your conversations with those in the Catholic Church, because, of course, when he went into hospital, there was lots of talk about what may well come next, what's going to be the next stages of this, and the way that the Catholic Church may change or not. What conversations did you have, and what sense do you get as to what stage we are in that perhaps progression for the Catholic Church? Yes,
I mean, we have unquestionably moved into a different phase of the papacy, and it's probably safe to say things will never be the same again. One journalist who was on a huge global trip with Pope Francis back in the autumn of last year, visiting quite a number of Asian countries, talking about at that time how he was. And remember, this is a Pope who for a long time now has moved about in a wheelchair, couldn't really walk, seemed quite fragile, but mentally absolutely is very strong. It would be, of course, unthinkable now to be talking about a kind of six-country tour of, or however many country tour of Asia. It's unthinkable to think that a Turkey trip can go ahead. And as we were talking about a few minutes ago, potentially he might be able to have audiences inside the Vatican. But I think that he will listen to the doctors now in a way that perhaps he hasn't done before, in a way that medically, as we mentioned 6 weeks ago, when he was struggling to breathe and had to hand over his homily for someone to finish, and doctors didn't want him to go outside on that cold, wet February day. Perhaps he will now listen because he realises perhaps how close he came to losing his life, just how seriously ill the Pope has been. But yes, talking about visitors to the Vatican, people within the Catholic Church. I mean, certainly all of the people that I've been talking to over the course of the last month, spent 3 of the last 4 weeks in Rome. Of course, there is this calmness, this sense of he is with us spiritually, even if he is not with us physically, because of course he's been in the hospital. But they will be hoping for more balcony appearances, and that will be enough.
Yeah, we are now getting details, I think, coming confirmed from our producer as well in Rome, of the abandonment of the route back to the Vatican. He is heading to the Basilica to pray. The Basilica's name, sorry, Lisa, you did give it to me a short time ago.
Santa Maria Maggiore, where, as I was mentioning, that everybody would have a funeral plan, a pope. So within that plan, he had always said that so the irony is that this is the location where he had said he would want to be buried, that the papal vehicle has now been diverted, and that's near the Colosseum.
We are now seeing that he has arrived at Santa Maria Maggiore, where it's reported that he is going to...
So he's arrived at the Basilica?
Yeah. To pray, before, I guess, going back to his apartment.
Another unexpected move. I mean, what wasn't clear was whether he always wanted to go into the Basilica to pray on the way back to the Vatican, or whether it's because of the amount of people in the streets, etc. But potentially that he wanted to do that, but it's just that we weren't told in advance that that was part of the plan.
I understand that he would want to go somewhere and maybe take a moment to himself in a place like that to pray and before returning back to the Vatican. All right, Lisa, for now, thank you for that. The Pope, as we're saying, has arrived at Santa Maria Maggiore, the papal basilica, where we expect him to pray before moving back to his apartment at Vatican City, having been discharged from the Gemelli Hospital after 38 days. He was admitted on the 14th of February, diagnosed with double pneumonia, and has now been allowed to leave hospital, but will have a 2-month recovery at the Vatican. All right. We'll, of course, have more coverage of all things Pope from the Vatican throughout the day.
First Minister, how are you?
Good morning. Good morning.
Nice to see you. How are you feeling?
Looking forward to getting into the parliamentary chamber.
Are you any further forward to making a decision?
No, it's an important day today.
All of the claims were in line with my parliamentary duties, so I'm making that clear to you, Conor.
He was a Scot through and through.
He was a very good politician.
Alex Salmond was controversial, he was a disruptor, but above all, he was respected.
Will you resign if you lose this week?
Again, I'm not planning to, of course, lose the vote of no confidence. I'm planning to win that vote of no confidence.
His face said it all.
My intention to stand down as party leader.
This is now a storm with deadly consequences. How are they feeling?
They're a bit scared at the minute.
We've been told to evacuate.
How are you feeling?
Devastated.
Hundreds of homes were wiped out by flooding. I'm Conor Gillis, Sky's Scotland correspondent.
It was probably the darkest time in my life.
Scott is 5 years sober after a cocaine addiction left him close to death. Scotland has a shameful record, worse than England, the worst in Europe.
Why not just say you've failed? Because then you might get more respect from families who've lost loved ones.
This is where one of the UK's most prolific rapists thought he'd got away with murder.
Sky News can reveal that former sex workers had told police he was sexually violent.
My Emma.
Free wherever you get your news.
It's over, isn't it?
The Americans say he is Rossi, a fraudster.
This has been one of the most bizarre cases ever heard in a courtroom in this country.
A dangerous murderer.
Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive Andrew Ennis after this?
She said she can forgive him, but as long as he's behind bars.
By doing the right thing, it's destroyed your life.
They terrorised me. They intimidated me.
Sky News, the full story first.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts, watching us live.
Live here from Washington.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place. And all at just the touch of the screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
Welcome back. We're going to stay with our coverage of the Pope being discharged from Rome's Gemelli Hospital after spending 38 days there being treated for double pneumonia. We're expecting him to make his way directly back to the Vatican, to his apartments there, where he's going to begin sort of 2 months of convalescence. But Lisa Holland, our correspondent, is still with us, who's been covering the Pope's illness for the past few weeks. And Lisa, we've been in touch with our producer there, who's given us some information about the Pope's decisions having been discharged.
So it does seem to be the case at the moment that obviously the plan was to go straight from the Gemelli Hospital to where we can see the Pope appearing on the balcony about 45 minutes ago from a fifth-floor balcony, looking well but still very, very fragile. And from there, he left quite soon after in his white Fiat papal car. And the plan was that he was expected to go straight to the Vatican, which without having to stop for traffic lights and the like, with a papal escort, probably would have taken him about 10 or so minutes. But then, of course, time ticked along and he hadn't arrived at the Vatican, and we know that the streets have been very busy. But it seems that he has diverted into the Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, which is his favourite place to go and pray. He often goes to pray there before and after his trips and on important occasions, seemingly because he obviously decided, or maybe we just weren't told in advance, that that's where he wanted to go, having spent 5 weeks in hospital. That's a kind of very special place to him, and that's clearly somewhere where spiritually he wanted to go and stop on the way back to the Vatican, because of course it begs the question of, like, having been transferred back to the Vatican and being instructed by doctors to spend the next 2 months recuperating and probably not leave the Vatican very much. It's obviously a place where he wanted to go. But for me, it raises two important points. Is one, of just how determined a character he is, because I think it's probably fair to say that the doctors wouldn't have particularly wanted him to make a stop off at another basilica, having just spent the last 5 weeks in hospital. But it is such an important place to him. And that's why when we're looking at the back streets of Rome and the like, we haven't actually seen him arrive at the Vatican just yet, because, as I say, he should have got there within about 10 minutes or so, a journey which for the rest of us in a taxi might take about 20-25 minutes. And
at least it probably tells us two things, doesn't it? As you say, the determination of Pope Francis to do at this stage what he wants to do, also his desire, I guess, going to Santa Maria Maggiore, the papal basilica, to want to have some spiritual time to think and to reflect and to pray at a place of great importance to him and to the Catholic Church.
It is a place of really great importance to him. And as we mentioned earlier, of course, any pope will have a funeral plan, no matter what state of health they are in. And he would be he had made it quite clear that he wanted to be buried there at this Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, and as opposed to the Vatican. And so he would be the first pope in history to have followed that path. What it also says to me, though, of course, is that the fact that he's able to stop there and he's not on oxygen, for someone who has spent the last 5 weeks on such extensive, and you can't really underestimate the oxygen support that he's been having, and that he has had at least 3 very significant breathing crises during the last 5 weeks, the fact that he's able to do that and that he's off oxygen is, of course, a hugely positive thing, that he's well enough to make that stop.
Well, actually, the last time you and I spoke was when one of those crises happened, where they had to, there was an intervention, wasn't there? And he was on, is it high pressure?
High flow.
High flow oxygen.
He's been on sort of 2 levels of oxygen, if you like. Overnight, he's been on this machine, which is a big mask, which is covering the nose and the mouth, and then also at times during the day on what they call a nasal cannula, which is essentially oxygen through the nose. So yeah, he has required. Remember that this is a pope who at a very young age, as a young adult, suffered from pleurisy, and he had part of his lung removed. So his lungs, his breathing, have always been his medical Achilles heel throughout all of his life. So you can understand why people have been so gravely concerned when it was revealed that not only, firstly, that he'd gone into hospital 5 weeks ago with bronchitis, but that his condition deteriorated. So 5 weeks ago, Friday just gone, and he went in with bronchitis, and then after that, on the subsequent Tuesday, that he was diagnosed with having pneumonia in both lungs. So yeah, he's remarkable, really, to have returned to this position of health from being so gravely ill. And then the following Saturday, when doctors made the rather dramatic announcement that his condition was being described as critical at that point.
Yeah, we're continuing to look at these live pictures of Vatican City. As we say, the Pope discharged from the Gemelli Hospital in Rome, expected to go to the Vatican. Through our reporting, through our team in Rome, information that
and we're
he's
told
diverted.
That the Pope is still inside that basilica, and his car is still waiting outside.
Talk to us about that as a potential decision. It's impossible to know exactly the decision-making behind it, but you've alluded to the fact, Lisa, haven't you, that before he was admitted to hospital, he went out in public on a cold February day, and doctors, people around him were concerned that he shouldn't have done that, and then he's admitted to hospital for 5 weeks with a double pneumonia. Now, on his way back from hospital, having been treated for 38 days, he makes a stop off what seems to be an unscheduled stop. I mean, we can't know for certain what the doctors will have said, but as you say, perhaps not what they would want him to do, to be stopping off on the way back to care.
Absolutely. I mean, they definitely, I don't think, would have wanted him to do that. We had been led to believe that he would leave the hospital and go straight back to the Vatican. Now, whether or not this was literally the Pope going along and saying, look, I want to stop off here at the Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, or whether or not it had been discussed in advance, we can't really know absolutely at this time. The suggestion is that it wasn't planned, it wasn't pre-planned, and that's something that he wanted to do. But to take you back in time, 6 weeks ago today, when this current health crisis began, the Pope was, if you just look at the picture that we're showing of the Vatican there at the moment, in St. Peter's Basilica, and you can sort of make out like a kind of white awning there. The Pope was sitting under that awning. It was a cold, wet February day. He struggled to finish the homily, and he passed the homily to an aide to finish. And on that day, Vatican journalists, Vatican watchers were saying this is crazy that the Pope is outside on this cold day when we know that he is somebody who struggled with his breathing anyway, and that surely it would have a sort of disastrous consequence to be outside on that day. Subsequently, it was the following Friday that he was then admitted to hospital with bronchitis. He'd already been being treated with antibiotics inside the Vatican, but went into hospital. But on that day that he went into hospital 5 weeks ago, last Friday, he had a planned meeting with the Slovak Prime Minister. And we understand that on that day, doctors were saying, you need to go to hospital. As things stand at the Vatican, we can't give you the treatment that you need. You are quite seriously ill. But the Pope Pope Francis refused to cancel the Slovak Prime Minister's meeting. He insisted the meeting went ahead. He insisted he finished it. And he said, I'll go, but once I've had my meeting with the Slovak Prime Minister, which does show you how determined a character Pope Francis is. And that's what led to the chain of events, going into bronchitis on Friday, February the 14th, then being diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs the following Tuesday.
Yeah, and Lisa, we are now just being told that the Pope has left St. Maggiore.
Santa Maria Maggiore.
Thank you, Santa Maria Maggiore.
And he's
Saint
now heading
Mary
to
Major.
Yes, exactly.
To my tongue.
And here we go.
Yeah, and he's on his way now to the Vatican.
To the Vatican.
And just sort of pondering the sequencing of this, perhaps it was always the plan, because had they said to anyone that he was going to St. Mary Major, and there he goes there in that white Fiat, as we believe, then people would have flocked there, of course, as well. So he's now we are told, on his way to the Vatican.
Very close there, so a couple of minutes and he will be finally back inside the Vatican. In the Santa Marta apartments, interesting as well, this modest Pope, the Pope of humility, he never wanted to be in the papal apartments. He waited for another remarkable moment, seemingly someone crossing the road
with the dog.
Yeah.
Saying hi, because we do believe him to be in the front seat there of that little Fiat.
He left the Gemelli Hospital in the front seat. Yeah. Whether he's just stopping to say hi or whether...
I mean, and of course, security is hugely tight around the Pope, but there are these moments, of course, because he's a man who wants to be around the people. We're going to stay with these pictures, of course, now as they're opening the doors of that Fiat 500, I think it's the 500 Max, the larger version of that vehicle. We saw the Pope in the front passenger seat, leaving the Gemelli. Looks like it's been a security check there before it's moving on. The Pope, who left the Gemelli Hospital, what was it, Lisa, just after 11:10, made his way to Santa Maria Maggiore Basilica, the papal basilica, St. Mary Major, and there, yeah, definitely in the front seat there, and you can see in his papal gowns, the white papal gowns there, the Pope, leaving the streets of Rome, entering the streets of Vatican City, and will be on his way now to his apartments.
Yes, and a refurbed apartment that we're told. So yes, the first point being the Santa Marta apartments, that he declined what previous popes have done, which is to live in papal apartments for the more modest Santa Marta guest house. But we're told that over the period of time whilst the Pope's been in hospital, the Santa Marta has been refurbished. We think I think it's safe to assume that he would have been set up with the kind of oxygen facility that he would need should he have any kind of breathing crisis. We're told specifically that there is a new bed for the Pope. Maybe it's a kind of special bed, a kind of hospital-style bed, who knows? But yes, that there has been some sort of refurbishment that's gone on at the Santa Marta guest house. We also know, of course, he does have his own team of doctors, probably an intensive care specialist, and also other medical experts. He won't just, of course, be going into the Vatican in any kind of medical isolation. He will have this team around him, and the scene will have been prepared for treatment should he need it. But, of course, it can never be the kind of treatment that you would get in a hospital.
Final thought from you then, Lisa. What happens now with the Pope? He's got 2 months at his apartments to recover.
Yeah, I would say what happens now with the Pope. Who knows with a Pope like Pope Francis? As we've seen from the journey back, the determination to be on the balcony, he's very strong-willed, but I do think there's been a shift that he will listen to the doctors a little more. Perhaps he won't be taking risks. He won't be outside on cold days, but it is getting warmer. It was expected to rain in Rome today. In the end, it was a warm day to welcome the Pope back to the Vatican.
See the sun is starting to break through those clouds as we're looking at St. Peter's Square in Vatican City. Lisa, thank you very much for that. We'll have more from you, of course, throughout the afternoons. The Pope has now been discharged from Rome's Gemelli Hospital and has returned to the Vatican City. Here, the scene, St. Peter's Square. Well, good afternoon. You're watching Sky News Today. It is 12 o'clock. Pope Francis has made his first public appearance since being discharged from a 38-day stay in hospital. He appeared first at the window of the Gemelli Hospital, where he was being treated for double pneumonia.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I see this lady with yellow flowers, holding yellow flowers. Very good. Thank you.
Well, our correspondent Lisa Holland is here with me. Good afternoon to you, Lisa. And you have been covering the Pope's illness during his time in hospital. It's the first time we've seen him. I think the first time I've heard his voice. I know there's been an audio recording. The first time we've heard him speaking. He looks frail, but he has been discharged.
Yes, he does look frail, but I think also you can see that he is clearly delighted to be going back to the Vatican. Within the past few minutes, he has gone inside the Santa Marta guest house, which is where he resides at the Vatican. But I mean, those simple words there from the Pope, thank you, because all the time in his messages, in the texts that were released, he kept saying, he kept asking people around the world to pray for him, and that is exactly, of course, what they did, and to keep faith, and thanking his doctors, and then saying, I see a lady there with yellow flowers, clearly a spontaneous comment from him there. He was only on the balcony for just a couple of minutes. It was very brief, and I think at one point he did appear to be, I think, struggling slightly. But still, if you put this in context, that this is someone who entered hospital just over 5 weeks ago, 5 weeks last Friday, February the 14th, and on three specific occasions that I can think of, he was very gravely ill. Doctors talked of respiratory crises. We know that his condition at one point was described as critical before he stabilised, and then was shown that his infection markers, that he was responding to treatment, that he was getting better. But a week into his hospitalisation on the following Saturday, so 7 days in, and his condition was described as critical. It's really quite remarkable to have not only seen him on the balcony, but here, sitting in the front seat.
Well, this was the next moment, wasn't it?
His papal car,
yeah.
Yes. And we talked...
Unexpected.
Yeah, hadn't we, about, talking to colleagues in Rome about how he would actually make that journey back to the Vatican, and would there be some kind of medical evacuation? Would it be by road? Surely it would have to be in an ambulance for someone who'd been so heavily reliant on oxygen, someone who has been treated for pneumonia in both lungs. And there he was in the front seat of a white Fiat in the papal car. That really was quite remarkable. And also there was a shot at just about 10 to 12, wasn't there? Just as he was about to go into the Vatican, a lady with a dog, and it seems like that they pulled over and that the Pope wanted to talk to that person, I'm told.
It's worth remembering as well. So once we saw him leave Gemelli, we thought he was on his way directly to the Vatican. We were looking at those pictures, and you and I were talking, Lisa, as we were waiting for that moment. It then seems as if he diverted en route to the Vatican and stopped off at Santa Maria Maggiore for a moment of prayer. We have got some detail exactly as to what happened when he arrived at the papal basilica, and I'll just read it out directly. He says that after leaving hospital, Pope Francis went to Santa Maria Maggiore and gave his eminence, Cardinal Macricas, some flowers to place before the icon of the Virgin Salus Populi Romani, and then he obviously moved on from there to Casa Santa Marta at the Vatican. So there was an unexpected moment, Lisa, wasn't there?
It was definitely unexpected. Definitely unexpected in that we had been told that there would be the balcony appearance, and then after that he would then be transported. He would be discharged, and he would be transported to the Vatican, which, without any stops, would take him, without stopping at traffic lights and with an escort, probably about no more than 10 or so minutes. And then, of course, he was expected to have arrived at the Vatican, but he didn't. And then it transpired that he'd stopped off at this basilica, which is a very, very special place to him, somewhere that we know he goes to pray before and after trips. Incidentally, also the place where he had wanted to be buried.
OK, Lisa, for now, thank you very much for that. We'll keep an eye on the situation at the Vatican throughout the day, but of course, let's go now to Harrogate, where, there he is, Sir Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, is giving a speech at the Lib Dem Spring Conference. Let's listen in.
Freedom and security of people across Europe, including ours, here in the United Kingdom. Their fight is our fight. So to our Ukrainian friends, on behalf of all Liberal Democrats, let me say once again, we thank you, we salute you, we stand with you today, tomorrow, always. And of course, that solidarity must go beyond mere words. That's why I'm proud that the United Kingdom has been Ukraine's staunchest ally right from the start.